This show was by request, and that's okay, because sometimes when you're doing a dozen shows a week, you need somebody to give you a request for a show type. So thank you. Let's begin. Welcome to Old Man Squad, fantasy basketball, everybody. I'm Dan Vespers. Today we're talking first round tough decisions. It was something we touched on a bit with Josh Millman earlier this week, and everybody was like, Dan, who were you taking between all of these guys and why? And I thought, okay, that's actually a fair point because I hadn't really done that. We did a show where I put some names in order in the first round, and I think that covered a lot of it. But this is an opportunity to really tackle head on the 6 or 7 first round player A versus player B decisions and what it'll mean for your fantasy team. You probably noticed as we got going, those that are watching live, that we have new things to promote. It's all internal stuff, so don't worry. I'm not throwing any more ads down your throat. First of all, on Twitter, I'm at Dan Vespers and at Old Man Squad. Those are the two feeds over there. You guys know I do a ridiculous, needlessly large amount of stuff over on social media, especially once the season gets started. That's when we're really cooking over on that platform. We are also now on Instagram at Old Man Squad Fantasy. For some reason, I didn't just get Old Man Squad there. I don't know why. I'll be mad about that one for the next 100 years. And then over on TikTok now. Yes, that's right. I'm a young person. Hello, fellow young people. TikTok, we are just Old Man Squad. So that's an easy one. Old Man Squad on TikTok, Old Man Squad on Twitter, Old Man Squad Fantasy over on Instagram. Hit that like button. Comment if you like what you're hearing or don't like. I don't care. We can just chat about it. That's all good. Subscribe and leave a 5-star review, and that'll get this boat floating in the right direction. As mentioned, today is first round ADP battles. Effectively, it's the guys that are your player A, player B. Player V? What a strange combination. I like to battle between audio and visual, so why shouldn't the rest of you? Things along the lines, as you'll hear in a moment, of between Wemby and Jokic. Everybody deciding who they do there at 1. At 3, people are deciding who they take between 2 names. At 5, I actually think there's 3 players that are all kind of in the discussion, and we'll work through them, and we'll come up with a definitive damn list if it's the last thing we do. Why are we doing this? What the hell's the purpose? Well, this one feels relatively straightforward. Who should you take when debating between 2 players with similar ADPs? The first round is extraordinarily critical. I don't know that any of these is necessarily the wrong choice, but you guys know that my main goal every day on this podcast is to make fantasy basketball easier. Meaning, 2 things. I like to teach you what I'm thinking as I think it, so hopefully you guys can start to kind of think the same way. Not like groupthink kind of thing, but just like as you're processing information, how do you take it in? That type of that side of things. And then also, is there a way to play fantasy basketball where you can maximize your chance of winning while minimizing the amount of time you have to put into it? And I know simply by watching a 35-minute podcast that I put out there, you're still not minimizing your time. But if we can go through this type of topic, and then on draft night, you don't have to do a whole lot more. You don't have to do hours and hours of deep dives and thinking and diving and whatever. That's our main goal every day on this podcast. And so this type of episode takes that in a little bit of a different direction. I guess it's not that different. Basically, for head-to-head leagues, that's what we're talking about today. We'll have a ton of Roto chats coming up. I've already started to schedule all of the guests that'll be talking about our Roto mock and strategy and all that fun stuff. This is for head-to-head leagues. How do we simplify your team building process? Which is effectively the short answer to why I'm making almost every decision I make on this particular podcast. That's enough of a preface. Let's start talking about some of the players involved. The first ADP battle, and this is the easy one, and we've talked about it before, but we'll do a quick rehash on it for those that are just checking in now. Victor Wembanyama with an ADP of 1.6, Nikola Jokic with an ADP of 1.7. Those are the top 2 names on the board. Which direction do you go? couple days ago, Josh said he's going Victor Wembanyama, and he knew he was going the opposite direction as me. And like, again, there's no wrong answer here. But let me just tell you why I am on Team Nikola Jokic for this one. I think it makes drafting easier. Wemby's amazing. And as I said on yesterday's afternoon show, he's probably going to be the most exciting and most fun player to roster in fantasy basketball. So why wouldn't I suggest that you guys take the most fun player in fantasy basketball? The answer is this. If we assume that Jokic and Wemby are somewhat close in their sort of absolute value to a team. Last year down the stretch, Jokic was a little bit ahead of Wembanyama, even over those last 2 months when Victor was finally sort of got the shackles off and was able to rumble forward. It was very close, but Jokic was just a little bit ahead. Victor destroyed in blocks, just obliterated Jokic in blocks, and beat him by about a 3-pointer per game. That's not nothing, but Jokic won the battle by 2.5 points, half a rebound, 3.5, 3 assists, roughly. And we're talking last 15, 20 games of the season, more or less. Jokic was ahead, believe it or not, by almost a full steal per game during that span, which I don't think is a number that holds, but it's conceivable he wins that again. Just boat raced Wemby in field goal percent. Was a little bit ahead in free throw percent. Jokic was having kind of a down month at the end of the year in foul shooting. I can't fully explain that. I mean, even if you go the last 2 months of the year instead of the last month, then he's up by 6% instead of like 2. And Jokic, despite winning the assist battle by 3-4, wins the turnover battle by about a quarter as well. 3 versus 4 is where they were at during that span. And in my eyes, even though Victor's advantage in one category was the biggest of any difference between the two players, like the gap in points was not that huge, but not nothing. The gap in rebounds was pretty small. The gap in assists was actually like kind of medium sized. The gap in steals was relatively small. I think when it all levels out, it'll be pretty small. The gap in free throws is not that huge. The gap in field goal is actually pretty big between the two guys. That's the second largest separation between the two. But for me, when one player is winning 2 of the categories and the other one is winning 7 of the categories, I just think it's easier to build around the guy that was winning 7. And you could argue that coming into this season, maybe Wemby scores a little bit more. I honestly don't know for sure on that front. That number might get very close to even. You know, maybe he gets closer to catching Jokic at the foul line. These things could happen. And Wemby would probably be overall ranked a little bit higher than Jokic at that point. But you're still talking about like 2 categories Wemby wins, 2 that are relatively even, 5 in that case that Jokic still probably wins. And I know that's oversimplifying this discussion, but the reason that particular note sort of is my big one for this show is that when you get back to your next pick, depending on whether you have pick 23, 24, like if you got these guys first or second in your draft, and then you'll also have pick 25 or 26 on top of it, you don't know exactly what players are going to get to you there. If you got Wemby, your first move in head-to-head is probably to think punting field goal might be my path here. Because I can build a team that I believe is as good as the other punt field goal teams that'll probably start with like a Trae Young or a James Harden or something like that. But I think I have this massive advantage because I've got a guy that can knock out blocks almost by himself and a huge advantage in rebounds. And I got a big man who hits 2+ 3-pointers a game and scores. These guys are impossible to find later on. What I can do after Wemby is just take guard after guard after guard after guard. Whereas a team like Trae Young has to figure out at some point what the 5th category is they're going to try to win. A Trae Young team is in great shape in points, threes, assists, and free throw percent. But what's the 5th category? Is it steals? Because if they go steals, do they ever end up with any big men on their team? Can they guarantee that they win those other categories? With Wemby, you've got a nice approach on blocks. You've got a nice approach on steals because you get probably, I would assume, a relatively big number out of your first round center. You got a lot of different paths you can go there, and you have a certain edge. Also, 5 assist center. You don't have to. I don't want to say that this is something you definitely have to do. But again, if you're looking at ADPs of guys around, 20 to 27 range, something like that, Harden's not making it that far. You're talking about Kyrie Irving, Jalen Brunson, Dame, LeBron, De'Aaron Fox, LaMelo Ball, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, Alperen Sengun, and DeJounte Murray. That's probably the guys you have a shot of getting in that range. If you took Wemby first, you're probably looking at Dame or LaMelo Ball as guys that are not particularly good at field goal percent, derive a lot of their value elsewhere, and make for a terrific pairing because big steals for LaMelo is a big thing. They both get assists. Dame is a monster free throw guy so if you're going to build a guard team, he's a huge asset there. What if those guys get picked at 21 and 22? Now you're a little bit in panic mode. Are you going De'Aaron Fox? Are you going Tyrese Maxey? I mean, maybe, but those guys don't, in my opinion, this year have the same per game appeal. And Fox isn't a really bad field goal guy anyway. Maxey wasn't even that bad at field goal percent either. Not that you have to be bad at it, but you kind of want the guy that's going to give you the positives in the categories you're looking for. Fox doesn't in that instance. So what do? Look, you'll be fine because Wemby's amazing, and no matter what player you take in the second or third round, you're still going to have a really good team because the first pick you made is a juggernaut. But I would argue then on the Jokic side, it doesn't matter. It literally does not matter who gets back to you at 23, 24, 25, 26. All of these guys pair with Jokic just fine. And that is why I think Jokic is my favorite number one pick, because he de-stresses fantasy draft night. You literally don't have to worry about who's there until the fourth round. Isn't that nice? Isn't that great? Oh, Kyrie Irving's there at 24? All right, I'll go that direction. LaMelo Ball's still there? Cool, I can go that way because Jokic is a monster in field goal percent. I'll take all this other stuff. Oh, LeBron is still there? Okay, whatever. Cool. My team's good at a lot of counting stats now. I don't really want Jalen Brunson there, but you guys catch my meaning. You can literally pair Jokic with anyone and make an argument as to why it's a pretty good decision. Maybe I wouldn't go Chet Holmgren. He's not making it that far anyway, but like attacking blocks with another lower scoring big man right out of the chute in a Jokic build probably doesn't make a ton of sense. Funny thing is, he doesn't pair all that horribly with Wemby. It's not great because you got to get your assists. You got to start piling up some guard stats, but it also takes care of some stuff. It is a weird kind of outside path there. But look at the rest of the names with an ADP between 15 and 35. Any one of them, you could be like, yeah, that dude fits with Jokic. Yep, that dude fits with Jokic. Yep, that guy does too. As long as you like the player involved. I don't really want DeJounte Murray at pick 24, no matter who I think he pairs with. But anybody that I like in that range, they all fit with Jokic. Battle number 2, Luka Doncic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Luka with an ADP of 3.2, Shai at 4.0. The only legitimate argument I've heard to go Shai in this one is that Luka has a 2-game playoff week. Yeah, it's not great, but also I don't know how you pass this over. Especially when you think about the fact that over the second half of last year, Luka was way out in front of Shai in per game ranking. So, this isn't like, frankly, even the first half of last year where Shai was the number 2 guy for a while. Shai fell off a bit. His steals came down, his scoring came down, and so with that, the positive impact he gave in scoring, field goal percent, free throw percent, all that kind of stuff came down with it. I also think, and, Roto, you could make an argument in either direction, maybe a little bit easier. Head-to-head, I think this one, despite the 2-game playoff week, I still think it's a pretty clear-cut Luka for me because you get Again, simplifying your build. With Shea, you get a big, big positive start in steals and free throw percent, probably. And points is going to be very good. But with Luka, you get mega elite scoring, probably best in the NBA. You get mega elite three-pointers from a guy who doesn't have a bad field goal percent number. That's kind of amazing. You get 10 rebounds a game out of a guard. You get 10 assists a game, which is cool because, again, assists are hard to find. He was also over a steal a game last year. Half a block actually isn't that bad for a point guard eligible player. We'll see if that's something that sticks year over year. The knock on Luka, of course, is that he's an absurdly high turnover dude, but so was Wemby. And for first rounders, it doesn't really matter all that much. You can kind of cover that up later if you really wanted to. The big negative for Luka, which again was smaller this last year than previous seasons, is that he's not a positive free throw shooter from the guard position. So it's sort of like a double whammy. You expect your guard to be the guy that lifts your foul shooting up. And Luka, in fact, does the opposite. But in terms of simplifying build, most players, it's the same thing again, coming back to you in the late second round, fit with Luka because he's so good at so many things. Pick any of them. Do they fit? Does Damian Lillard fit with Luka Doncic? Sure, why the hell not? Now, you're not a positive in field goal percent anymore, but you also don't have any big men yet, so that'll sort of fix itself as you go. You're very good in scoring. You're very good in threes. Now, suddenly, your team is actually pretty freaking good at the foul line because Dame is one of the biggest positive impact free throw shooters in the NBA. I think he was only behind Embiid last year in that department. So Luka's neutral gets wiped out pretty fast. Your assists are good. Your rebounds are still fine because you're at 15 a game and you haven't drafted a forward or a center yet. Your steals could be a little better. Dame's not that awesome there. Your turnovers suddenly aren't as awful anymore because Dame isn't super high. He fits. I'm not saying that's the direction you have to go. I'm just saying you can literally pick any player on the board and you can make an argument as to how they fit with Luka Doncic. You want to go LaMelo there? Great. Scoring, threes, boards, assists, steals, all great. Field goal and free throw now pushing back towards neutral. Turnovers, not that great. Anybody fits. Jokic, they fit a little better because he's Jokic. But with Luka, again, you make it easy. I also, and I don't know that this really matters for our discussion today, I also think that Shea is someone who maybe is more like 5 or 6 ranked this season. There's a safety number in there. And then I'll also point out, on top of everything else, with the Luka playoff thing, depending on, first of all, when your playoff weeks are, it might have a smaller impact on you. You might be able to get a bye. You got to get there. And it's just so much easier to get there with Luka as your lead horse. And just try to build a team that's strong enough that in a slower week for him, you can still make it through. Our third matchup of the day is a Hydra, a three-headed monster here. Giannis Antetokounmpo at 6.1. Tyrese Haliburton, whose number I forgot to write down for some reason, but he's 7.1. Anthony Davis at 7.8. My order among these players is AD over Giannis over Haliburton. And again, I'll stress that this is a head-to-head discussion because, I mean, if it wasn't, then Giannis would not be part of my board for this one. So give me Anthony Davis first, even though he has the latest ADP of this group. And a lot of that is just because of per-game appeal. You can tell me that Haliburton and the 10, 11 assists a game, like getting that very scarce stat early, is the way to go. And, you know, you'll be fine if you go the Haliburton route. But you just get more out of Anthony Davis. It's sort of inarguable. Certainly by the end of last year, AD was so far out in front of Haliburton that it was just like, it was an incomparable discussion. He led him in scoring. He led him in rebounding. He led him in steals. He led him in blocks. Actually, steals were a dead heat. Led him in field goal percent. And Haliburton beat him by just a little bit in free throw numbers. Like, because AD's percent was lower, but his volume was much higher. And they were both positives. Neither guy is a particularly high turnover player if you're comparing Anthony Davis to Haliburton. And on the AD front, you can go a lot of different directions because not only does he get you all the traditional big man stuff, which is points, I guess, isn't really traditional big. AD's points are fine. They're not spectacular, but he gets you a ton of rebounds. He gets you great blocks and field goal percent, but he also, like the other first round bigs, basically, is a decent foul shooter, gets steals, and can pass a little bit. AD was at 3.5 assists last year. Not at the 5+ that Embiid got, not at the 9 that Jokic got. But that type of arsenal out of Anthony Davis makes him a pretty easy player to build around as well. And again, that's what today's show comes back to. Is this player relatively easy to build around? And the answer for Anthony Davis, in my opinion, is generally yes. You can go either with a lean in or you can go with a balance out. There's a chance that someone like James Harden might actually make it back. Well, probably not with the Kawhi Leonard news anymore, but up until yesterday afternoon, there was a chance James Harden might make it back to you there. And then you fix your threes, you fix your assists, you continue to put up really nice defensive stats. You improve your free throws. Yeah, your field goal comes back down, but now suddenly you're pretty damn good in, frankly, almost everything. Or you lean a different direction. What if you decide to go Devin Booker in the second round, who's okay in assists, but not a great defensive stats guy, covers you up, great in percentages, good in points. You're probably punting threes if you go that direction, and that's okay. Not a huge deal. Let's see. Who else could potentially get back to you in the second round? I still don't think Chet Holmgren makes a ton of sense. What if Scotty Barnes landed in your lap? Okay, well, now you might want to think about, I don't want to say punt free throw because you still don't have a guard, but you're a damn well-rounded team. Maybe punt points, maybe punt threes is the direction there, or maybe punt nothing. Because you're such a well-rounded team after those 2 picks, you can see what comes your way in the third round. What if Freddie VanVleet makes it to you in the third round? Okay, you're probably punting points at that juncture, but everything else is doing okay. And again, for me, it's who's going to make my attack easier. You also need to think a little bit about who can handle some of the first 2 or 3 players on the board. Like, can you take an Anthony Davis team and make it competitive with Wemby and a Jokic-led team? The way you do that, well, against Wembanyama, punting threes wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. You're not completely ruined in the blocks competition if you just take another shot blocker somewhere along the way. Maybe not a bad foul shooting one. If the Wemby team goes for blocks and guard stats, you probably lean a little bit harder into big man stats. What about Jokic? Can you beat a Jokic team? You could certainly overcome the Jokic advantage in scoring. Maybe you punt assists if that's the way you're thinking about going, because you can take him in everything else. Giannis would be my second choice in this group. He does kind of force you into a punt free throw. And I get it. I have to add this caveat every time. You don't have to punt free throw with Giannis, but I think you'd be a little bit crazy not to, taking him in the first round, because you then spend so much draft capital trying to correct his terrible foul shooting that you don't get the categories you need to remain strong, which for Giannis, you want to make sure you're very competitive in points, boards, field goal percent, defensive stats. I'd say both of them would be critical. And if you can get assists, that's awesome. That gives you 6 very strong categories. Turnovers, free throw percent, 3-pointers probably are the things that suffer there, depending on what players you start to rack up. The note on Giannis, of course, is that you have these like prime second and third round targets. And if you don't get them, you start to get into a little bit of a panic mode, like LeBron, Scotty Barnes, De'Aaron Fox. These are these Alperen Şengün. These are these guys that fit great in the early going. Last year, De'Aaron Fox was number 11 in punt free throw build. LeBron was number 9 in a punt free throw build. These are guys that you can get mid-second round, sometimes even third. Rudy Gobert was frickin' number 15 in a punt free throw build. So, like, these guys that jump way up the board are guys you end up kind of targeting. But if you don't get Fox, if you don't get LeBron early, then you probably just have to take a regular old-fashioned guard, because you're not going to find that many guys that give the perfect complement to Giannis while also not wasting any of their fantasy value on the free throw number. Like, at a certain point, you're just like, okay, crap, I got to just like take a guard that gets assists. Like a Freddie VanVleet would actually still be fine in that mold. Or somewhere along the way, I don't know, do you look at like a Darius Garland or whatever? Like, these guys are going to be worse in a punt free throw build because they're positives there. But maybe you can find someone who's not a big positive there and still shore up the guard stats that are going to be hard to find. So that's the problem with a Giannis build, is you kind of have to get the main targets. You've got to get LeBron. You've got to get De'Aaron Fox or Scotty Barnes or Alperen Şengün, big man who assists kind of thing. And the board is dramatically shrunk through the first 3 or 4 rounds. After that, like, the later rounds for a Giannis build are actually not that hard, because you can take guys that, you don't have to worry about it. Zion is a terrific fit in a Giannis build because he gets 5 assists. Who cares about the foul shooting? Are we punting threes? Maybe. We don't have to, but sure feels like we're going that direction. Zion's a fun one because, you're getting the out of position assists. So don't, again, get caught up just taking traditional big men who are bad at foul shooting. You have to make sure that you get scoring. You have to make sure that you try to get some assists, some steals in the mix as well. Otherwise, you end up winning rebounds, blocks, field goal percent, and turnovers. And you forgot to get steals, assists, or scoring. So you've got to get those other 3 things. That's why those targets early, like LeBron, like De'Aaron Fox, like Şengün, who's a nice scoring center who gets those assists, that's why these guys are useful. Because if you get to later on and you're looking at like a Trace Jackson Davis, hey, he's terrible at foul shooting. Okay, yeah, but he's also going to score like 9 points a game this year. Ooh, Derek Lively, he jumps a lot when I punt free throw. Yeah, he's going to score 10 points a game this year. You can't forget to get the hard categories in a punt free throw build, which are typically the guard stuff. But which of the guard stuff is Giannis good at to start? Assists and steals. Which of the guard things is Giannis bad at? Threes and free throw percent. So if you're thinking about like which direction to go, think about the out of position stats that your first pick gets and lean that, or lean away from those, I guess I should say. And then Haliburton is my third choice in this group, kind of by default. He's better than the next crop of players. I also, you guys know this, I like punting points, and Haliburton is an amazing punt points option in the first round because you get efficient threes, assists, steals. You even get some blocks out of your guard, low turnovers. Rebounds leave a little something to be desired, but if you're punting points, those will come because you're going to take a 12-point, 10-rebound center at some point along the way, like an Ivica Zubac or an Isaiah Hartenstein or someone who's not bad at foul shooting, but you don't have to worry about the fact that they don't score 16, 17 points. So Haliburton is, again, my by default choice there. And honestly, he might be easier to build around than Giannis because the board opens up so much if you don't care that much about points. But it also, and Adam Stock mentioned this a couple weeks ago, punting points tends to be kind of a hard one for novices to pull off. So there. Joel Embiid versus Jason Tatum, 8.1 versus 8.8. This one I'm going to keep simple. And Josh Lloyd said it best in his appearance on the show about a month ago. Joel Embiid has dealt with the same messy injury stuff over and over and over again. And as much as I don't mind the fear, the roto fear, if this is a games cap league and he misses some ball games, it's really not that big of a deal. With head-to-head, if Embiid misses any stretch of time, any long stretch of time, your team is in so much trouble. It's crazy. Like, I think there's actually ways to overcome it a bit on the roto side. You get to fill in those missed games. You never get those zeros back on the head-to-head side. The guy you're picking up off the wire, I mean, hopefully it's Andre Drummond, but It's just not going to be the same. And it totally changes the makeup of your team as well, which, again, with Roto, not as big of a deal because you're trying to build somewhat of a balanced club. So, if Drummond comes in and just gives you a few different things for whatever stretch, not that big of a deal. If you've built a Joel Embiid team on the head-to-head side and he goes down and you're like, well, I'll just replace him with Andre Drummond. Suddenly you're losing what's probably a big edge in free throw shooting, and it becomes a huge negative. So you flip the identity of your team, and it becomes really hard to stay on top. So just play it safe with this one in head-to-head. Go Jason Tatum. I know he's not super exciting, but there are little things you can do, as Adam Stock let us know, to get a Tatum-led team more competitive with the top clubs in a way that, like, Embiid is immediately competitive with the top guys, but also is terrifying to roster in head-to-head. I would also point out that down the stretch last year, Jason Tatum actually looked pretty good. Like, he started to look a little bit more like himself the second half-ish of last year. He was number 11, 27 points, 8 boards, 5.5 assists. Like, he was a very well-rounded fantasy play. And I get it. Well-rounded is not the easiest to build around in head-to-head, but it does open the board up a little bit for you in the second and third rounds because, again, you don't have to make your call early. That said, if you start with Tatum and you're starting to think, how the hell do I compete with the Lukas, the Jokic's, the Wembanyamas, you have to eliminate something. You ain't going to beat a Jokic or a Doncic team with Tatum and probably still trying to win assists because then you take too big of a hit in the other stuff. And then you'll end up losing to some of these assist-led teams or to some of the bigger men-led teams. Tatum's assists were good, but they weren't great. And so you probably have to get rid of something. Maybe it's steals. You only got 1 steal a game the second half of last year. So you're going to have to just wipe something out. You might even need to wipe 2 things out, but you don't need to pick what that is immediately. And so that makes it a little bit easier. Building a team around Joel Embiid is actually certainly way simpler because he's just great at everything. He's like Jokic. He's like Luka. You can pair him with anybody, and you're like, yep, this'll work because Embiid is a monster. But you also have to kind of build a team with the expectation you're going to be without your top pick for a quarter of the year or more. And you don't have to do that with Tatum. I know he's got the finals run. That does make me a little bit nervous. I don't know that he's going to get to like 76, 77 games played this year, but just play it safe. And frankly, from just like this year makes me want to cry kind of thing, it's just easier to have a team where you don't feel like you're constantly hanging on by a thread. By the way, I'm totally fine with you going Embiid after that because the next choices, you start to have to get really creative. And that's Steph Curry at 11.6 versus Trae Young at 12.0. I would rather have Joel Embiid over both of these guys. And I know that some of you may disagree with me on the Trae Young side, but I hate starting a team feeling like I need to punt multiple categories. And with Trae Young, if you're going to compete with those top clubs, you kind of have to. Because he's going to give you a really strong start in points, threes, assists, and free throw percent. And he was pretty good in steals last year, but not like hyper elite. He wasn't Jokic level in steals. Like you're taking a guard and you're starting behind one of the early centers in that department. He was not. I'm looking at the steals guys. Trae was at 1.3. The guys at the top of the board, Embiid was 1.2. Shea was 2. Jokic 1.4. AD 1.2. Luka 1.4. Wemby is probably going to be at 1.2 or better this year. Haliburton 1.2. You don't have an advantage on those teams. You're keeping up with Trae, but you have scoring and you have assists. You're competitive with Haliburton at the top of the board there. You're a little bit ahead of Jokic, but you ain't going to beat Jokic in field goal percent. You're not going to beat him in rebounding unless you lean hard away from the stuff you're already good at. You're going to have to beat these top teams in the 4 categories I just mentioned: points, threes, assists, and free throw percent. And you have to find a way to get a 5th category in there. And the easiest one is probably steals. So now you're looking at a team where you're just getting guard after guard after guard after power forward / center that's good at assists and steals. And the board gets real freaking narrow because after the second round, after the third round, the number of centers that are good at foul shooting and assists and steals is very small. I mean, you can sort centers by who got steals. Jokic, Wemby were at the top of the board. They're gone. Şengün, not a great fit for this particular roster with the free throw issue. Uh-oh. Where do you go? Adebayo, not a bad choice. He gets some assists and some steals. Doesn't help you in threes, but hopefully with the number of guards you're drafting, that's not that big of a deal. So Bam is in there. JJJ, do you want to be competitive in blocks? It's not a great fit, but not the worst at that spot. Doesn't really assist all that much. Someone like a Julius Randle will have power forward center eligibility and get assists. Pascal Siakam at power forward gets assists. These guys are not great at foul shooting, but they're not so bad that they're going to break you. You have to find centers that are not huge negatives in free throw shooting that also get you some assists or some steals. DeAndre Ayton, you think he's going to stay upright? Could you go Jared Allen? He was near 3 assists last year, and he wasn't that bad at the foul line. Jabari Smith Jr. didn't pass at all, but at least he wasn't a bad foul shooter. Vooch has long been a pretty good choice in this particular build, if you have any faith in him. The options just get limited, is what I'm saying, because you're kind of wiping out the super low-scoring, high rebounding, bad free throw shooting, shot blocking bigs, and then whoop, you're left with like 5 guys left that you have to pick from. In terms of who between Trae Young and Steph Curry is easier to make a team to beat those top clubs, it's Trae Young. Because again, you do those punts, and then that's your chance to sort of needle thread your way past the top teams. Steph is probably going to have a better 9-category year than Trae Young this season, but he's not so overwhelmingly good in 4 categories that you could just be like, all right, I'm going to win these 4, and then I'm going to do something else. Steph is going to be good at scoring, and he's going to be great at threes, and he's going to be very good at free throw percent, and he's going to be like serviceable in rebounds from a guard and serviceable in field goal percent and serviceable in turnovers and not that great in steals. And for Steph, you're like, well, I'm probably going to punt steals, but I just started a guard build with a punt steals guy. It's actually pretty tough with a Steph Curry head-to-head build. I think he's one of the hardest, and that's probably why he's going basically last in the first round. He's one of the harder head-to-head players to build around. Because punt assist, punt steals probably makes sense, and then you end up targeting guys like DeMar DeRozan. Well, no, I guess that doesn't really make sense. You're looking for like point guards who play more like scoring guards. So you want to win points and threes and like have okay rebounds from your guard and try to get back in the mix in field goal percent, and you'll win free throw, and you probably will have a shot at turnovers. So that's kind of your Steph needle thread, but that's a hard one to pull off, at least in my opinion. And it's why, by the way, Joel Embiid, to me, I know you've got the fear hanging over him, but Embiid, like, if he is even remotely close to healthy this year, he's so much easier to build around than these guys towards the end of the first round. And let's lump the last group? Nope. No babies with fevers and coughs right now. This group all together, Anthony Edwards at 12.3, Kevin Durant at 13.2, Domantas Sabonis at 14, and I'm going to put James Harden in this mix because with the Kawhi news, he's going to go jumping up to the end of the first round. How would I order those guys? Almost the opposite way. Not quite. Harden over Durant over Sabonis over Anthony Edwards. I think Anthony Edwards far and away is the most difficult name to build around of anybody that we talk about in this show because, you know, he's like a Steph Curry mold type of player, but lower threes and lower free throw percent and probably lower scoring. And the other stuff was actually pretty close, other than Anthony Edwards being better in steals. So why would I do that? I wouldn't, by the way, is the answer. That's why he's last on this board. I might even argue that James Harden could be easier to build around than Steph Curry because he's going to be a lot more like Trae Young with threes and points and assists. I think I might even like Harden more than Trae Young, although I'm a little worried about the Clippers getting eliminated if Kawhi can't get himself somewhat healthy. But let's not worry about that right now. Harden has a chance to be probably not as big of a positive in scoring as Trae Young, but I think a small positive there. He'll hit a bunch of threes. He's going to be a good rebounding point guard eligible player. He'll have big assists, good defensive stats for a point guard. I would think steals and blocks, frankly. Harden will be probably at 1.1 steals, probably around that same 0.8 blocks. Field goal percent is going to be bad. Free throw is going to be very good. He's going to be a lot like Trae Young with better rebounds and better blocks. Lower points, so maybe that's why you still lean Trae, but Harden doesn't force you to punt blocks or rebounds in the same way that Trae Young, you kind of end up doing it. So Harden, to me, probably bumps up into the group above this chunk. And then you get to Kevin Durant. And the reason I have Durant over Domantas Sabonis is just, again, you have more avenues. And frankly, you might be able to get both of those guys. If you have KD at 12, you could go Sabonis at 13 if you wanted to. Let's say Harden was off the board, and now your team is kind of middling in a lot of stuff and very bad at three-pointers, but like pretty good at rebounds, pretty good at assists, not great at steals, but you don't have any guards yet. Not great at blocks, but your power forward is better than your center. Good at field goal percent. Durant helps cover up some of Sabonis' free throw. You have a pretty well-rounded team, and you're probably punting threes at that point. And then with Sabonis, if you went Domantas first, you get a really big start in rebounds, great assists from your center, and a really nice start in field goal percent, but you're in trouble in a lot of other stuff. You have low threes, low steals, low blocks, low free throw, kind of bad turnovers. And didn't score that much either. So I think Sabonis is a really hard player to build around as a first rounder. I think he's a pretty good player to add in as a second rounder because you get the out of position stuff, but you probably shouldn't be expecting to win blocks because Sabonis is one of the worst shot blocking centers in the NBA. So that last group for me is Harden, who again might frankly move above Steph Curry for how easy it is to build a head-to-head team. I think you could frankly move him in that group with Trae Young. And then Durant, who is definitely harder to build around than Trae. He's a lot, frankly, like Steph. Those two probably belong in their own little group. And then Domantas Sabonis is in his own tier, and then Anthony Edwards is in his own tier down at the bottom. Oof, this one went longer than I expected. I was hoping to keep it to 30 to 35. We went closer to 45, but I thank you guys for hanging out with us, and I think we covered a lot of really good material on it as I now wipe this page off the screen, and you guys get to go back to seeing my ugly mug. Please, again, if you got comments, throw them at me. Happy to answer them. I'm still just barely able to keep up. We're getting close to the point where I'm not going to be able to answer every YouTube comment because they're coming in 10, 15, 20 question chunks all of a sudden. But for now, I'm hanging in there. At Dan Vespers on Twitter, at Old Man Squad on Twitter and TikTok, at Old Man Squad Fantasy on Instagram because I screwed that up and I don't know if you can change your Instagram handle. If somebody knows how to do that, feel free to put a comment in there. Hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe no matter how you're taking in the stuff. I hope you enjoyed this one. I think we'll probably at some point do the second round. Once we get to the third, I don't know that the decisions are quite so severe, but maybe that's about as far as we'll go. I've got, again, all these great ideas that we got to get to. I've got all these shows with guests coming up. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. I'm Dan for Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Toodaloo for now.